Okay, so in this video, we are going to be starting our unit of ecology. We're going to be looking into our natural environment and seeing how different things interact based on what we've learned over the course of the year through different organismal interactions. So looking at this unit, we are going to start with ecological organization. And we'll have videos coming out for energy and living things, population size, biotic interactions, biodiversity and succession, and last but not least, the biogeochemical cycles. So there's going to be videos for all of these, but we are going to start with ecological organization in this one. So take a minute. Why do we not find cacti or penguins in Penns Valley? What about Antarctica and the desert is different from Penns Valley? Take a minute, answer this question, then we'll talk about it. Okay, so the reason we don't find any of these in our environment, you'd think normally penguins live in cold. There are a couple tropical penguins, and cacti usually need very arid environments, things like deserts. So they're dependent on the factors in their environment. Not only have they adapted over time, we saw in the last unit with evolution, that they have adapted to those characteristics, but they need certain aspects to be able to survive properly. The penguins need fish in order to survive, or else they can't eat. The cacti need lots of sun and very little rain, because if you give them too much water, if you've ever kept a cactus as a houseplant, if you water them too much, they will end up rotting and dying. So they need very limited amounts of water. So environmental factors are going to play a very large role in this unit of ecology. So ecosystems need a lot of things to survive. For example, whenever we look at an ecosystem, we look at the plants, the animals, as well as the other kind of environmental aspects, the soil conditions, the water conditions, the air, the minerals in the soil and in the rock, different larger factors like are there trees versus are there shrubs or grasslands? Do we have lots of decaying matter? Things like dead leaves, dead logs, all of those are going to provide nutrients to the environment. We typically lump these into two categories, biotic and abiotic. So biotic factors are living parts of the ecosystem. Bio is life, so we consider these to be the plants, the animals, the fungi, the bacteria of the ecosystem, and we can tell that they're living because of those 7 characteristics we talked about at the beginning of the year. So these organisms are able to reproduce, they can move, they can respond to their environment, they have DNA, they have cells, things like that. So biotic is going to be then opposed by abiotic. Abiotic are non-living parts of the environment. They're going to provide the physical and the chemical components of the environment. So things like wind, sunlight, soil and everything in the soil, the temperature, the atmosphere, the water, the humidity, as well as things like decaying organisms, rocks, things like that. So, this is Penn's Cave. Take a moment. What do you think are biotic factors and abiotic factors within Penn's Cave? Okay, just in this picture alone, we can get a lot from it. So, biotic factors are going to be these living things. So, we see a lot of moss growing along the rocks. We have other grasses and other plants. If you've ever been to Penn's Cave, there's fish in the water. There's also things like bats and insects that live inside the cave. And other organisms around the environment. So all of the animals will be considered biotic. There's also likely mushrooms and molds and things that would also be considered biotic. Abiotic, on the other hand, is the non-living aspect. So we've got, obviously, rocks. This is a cave. So the stalagmites, the stalactites, all of the minerals forming within the cave. We also have the water. the air, the sunlight, at least outside of the cave, and there are, of course, more factors. The temperature, the water running off of the stalactites. We already got water. Things like that. So this is a good thing to look at whenever you are actually looking in an ecosystem, because you can break it down and see how these organisms are interacting with what has been given to them. This also applies if you keep any pets. So in my classroom, I have these Phyllobates vittatus. These are Gulfoducean dart frogs, or a species of Costa Rican dart frog. So we have an enclosure over in the back of the room. So in their natural environment, again, we're going to have a lot of biotic and abiotic factors. In my terrarium alone, we have plants, we have the frogs, we have, they eat fruit flies, so there are a lot of leftover fruit flies that they didn't get. I also tried to make it a bioactive enclosure. Bioactive is something we say in the hobby if it has all of the natural parts to maintain some sort of community or ecosystem level. So included in that, along with the plants, I have a cleaning crew of springtails and other detrivore insects. So I think I have couple isopods in there as well as the springtails, and they kind of clean up all of the mold and all of the mushrooms and all of the decaying matter within there. In terms of abiotic factors, we have the water. These are frogs, so they do like to spend time in the water. The air, the rocks, as well as there's a bunch of pieces of decaying wood. In this case, since they are non-living at this point, we would consider them to be abiotic. They are no longer performing all 7 of the characteristics, so they would be considered non-living at this point. We also have the soil. We have the lights, which in their case I have more grow lights just to help them and the plants kind of be supported. They don't need any special lighting. They don't need UVB or anything like that. So I just use normal aquarium lights for them. Other things would be the temperature. And there are many other factors that could be played into this. So this is going to be really important because we're going to see over the next couple days how these organisms interact with each other and with other factors in their environment. Why do penguins need to adapt to the cold? Based on the abiotic factors, we saw that normally there is a very cold temperature there. There's a lot of snow, a lot of, in terms of rainfall, we have a lot of snow and a lot of ice. So they need to be able to move across the ice. They need to be able to swim to catch their prey. Things like that. The other thing we're going to do is kind of review the levels of organization that we talked about at the beginning of the year. So we start out at the organismal level. We have so far gotten to about the level of organism. We've started with the organic chemistry and the molecules and the atoms that build all of the things around us. We then combine those molecules to form things like organelles. Those organelles come together to form cells, and that is where life technically begins. We combine those cells to form tissues. Those tissues then combine to form organs. Those organs come together to make your organ systems, and your organ systems come together to make you who you are. So we have gone that far, and now we're going to be looking at the big picture. What happens when we have multiple different organisms? So we start out at a population. Populations are groups of organisms that have the same species and occupy the same space. So for example, my dart frogs over there will be one population of these dart frogs. Even though they are captive bred, I have one population of the same species occupying the same enclosure. Same thing if we were to consider this classroom a population. It would be a small group of biology students in the larger context of the school. If we take that population, we combine it with another population or multiple populations, we get a community. Communities are groups of interacting populations that live in the same area at the same time. So we have, in this picture, we have there's a moose, there's, I believe, I think that's a bobcat. We have owls, so we have different species interacting in the same environment. We still haven't talked about the abiotic factors, but we are talking about multiple species interacting. We add those abiotic factors when we get to the level of ecosystem. So ecosystems are going to be communities that include all of the living and non-living factors that affect it. So all of the abiotic factors are going to influence what biotic factors can live there. So different amounts of rain can affect what types of plants are able to grow. Obviously, if you have a drought or something, then the plants will suffer, especially if they're used to lots of rainfall. And this change and specificity of things like plants, animals, climate lead us to biomes. So biomes are regions of land that are characterized by the same plants, animals, and climate. So for example, if we were to compare a savanna to a desert, both of them are typically hot and dry. But in a savanna, we have a lot of grasslands. We have a lot of grasses. We have a lot of short plants, a lot of shrubs. In deserts, on the other hand, we have a lot more sandy, much more rocky soil. So what happens is, instead of growing those grasses, you tend to grow plants that are adapted to the desert, things that lose their leaves in the presence of drought, or cacti that are able to store water inside of their stems so that they can survive. Also things with large root systems so that they can reach water that is soaked really far down into the ground. And that's different from savannas, which are typically more grassland and have more organisms that are meant for that grassland. There are also aquatic biomes. So for example, lakes and ponds can be considered biomes. Rivers can be considered biomes. Also, open oceans and coral reefs are different types of biomes because they have specific physical features and specific populations that affect how it works and how it is classified. So for example, you'll find things like whales and dolphins out in the open oceans, but you may not find them in coral reefs. You'll find more smaller fish that are akin to things like clownfish and things like that that live in with the coral. And last but not least, if we take all of those biomes and combine them together, we get the biosphere. The biosphere is the portion of Earth that can support life. So in this case, the crust of the Earth, and a little bit down into the crust, we get a lot of organisms that live on land, on water, in the air. We have some that live in the soil, which would also be considered into the biosphere, but we would not be able to get down into the mantle or the core because nothing currently lives there. This is also why you don't see a biosphere on Mars, because we have not technically found life on Mars yet. So there would not be a biosphere because it cannot support life yet. So within an ecosystem, we also have a lot of classifications. And this is where it's going to lead into our next video. So in our next video, we will be talking about the movement of energy throughout an ecosystem. We're going to be talking about producers, consumers, predators versus prey, herbivores, omnivores, carnivores, and how things get energy from each other. So that is where I'm going to end it today. There will be a couple options on Schoology for you to practice this. And yeah, so that's where I'm going to end it for today. If you have any questions, feel free to email me.